The Sheffield family reunion had always been a choreographed affair, each moment weighted with tradition that stretched back 4 generations. 78-year-old Uncle Harold still insisted on grilling the steaks exactly as his father had done. Cousin Margaret still brought her grandmother's peach cobbler, though everyone knew she'd long since switched to store-bought filling. And the ceremonial toast, that sacred moment on the final evening, remained unchanged in its ritualistic precision. This year, the gathering was held at the sprawling Berkshire estate of Thomas Sheffield, the eldest of the current generation and the family's unofficial patriarch since their father's passing 3 years ago. 112 family members had traveled from across the country for the weekend, their numbers necessitating rented tables arranged in concentric circles on the vast lawn beneath string lights, and the watchful gaze of ancestral portraits hung specially on the garden walls. At 32, Emma Sheffield sat at one of the outer tables, her fingers nervously tracing the etched family crest on her wine glass. Unlike her older brother Benjamin, who held court at the center table with Thomas and the other family elders, Emma had always existed on the periphery of Sheffield importance, respected for her name, but relegated to the edges of family decision-making and recognition. "This is the year, isn't it?" whispered her cousin Claire, seated beside her. "The chair passes to your generation tonight." Emma nodded, a complicated mix of emotions tightening her chest. The Sheffield chair, a handcrafted walnut throne dating back to 1889, was more than furniture. It was the physical embodiment of the family's legacy. Passed ceremonially to the next generation when the current patriarch decided the time was right, it carried with it not just symbolic weight, but actual authority within the complex web of family business interests and trust distributions. For nearly a century, the chair had passed from eldest son to eldest son, a tradition as unquestioned as it was predictable. Benjamin, at 35, had been preparing for this moment his entire life, his business degree from Wharton and his careful cultivation of relationships with the family elders all stepping stones to this inevitable inheritance. Emma watched as her brother laughed at something Thomas said, his confidence palpable even from across the lawn. She loved Benjamin, but sometimes wondered if he saw her at all, really saw her, beyond her role as his supportive younger sister. As twilight deepened, Thomas rose from his seat, crystal glass in hand. The murmur of conversation died immediately. He cut an impressive figure against the backdrop of twinkling lights, silver-haired and straight-backed at 74. "Family," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "Once again we come together to celebrate what binds us, blood, history, and purpose." Emma felt the familiar tightening in her throat. The ceremonial toast had begun. What no one expected, what no one could have predicted, was what happened next, when Aunt Victoria, Thomas's younger sister by only 11 months, suddenly rose from her chair and spoke the words that would upend nearly a century of Sheffield tradition. "Before you continue, Thomas," Aunt Victoria said, her voice firm despite her 83 years, "I believe we need to reconsider what's about to happen." A collective intake of breath rippled across the gathering. Victoria Sheffield had always been respected within the family, a shrewd businesswoman who had expanded the family's publishing interests internationally, but she had never before interrupted the ceremonial toast. Such a breach of protocol was unprecedented. Thomas froze, glass still raised, his expression a mixture of surprise and irritation. "Victoria, we're in the middle of the family toast. Whatever concerns you have can surely wait until—" "No, they cannot," Victoria interrupted, setting down her napkin with deliberate precision. "For 4 generations, we have passed the Sheffield chair to the eldest son without question. Tonight, you plan to continue that tradition by passing it to Benjamin." All eyes shifted to Benjamin, who sat straighter in his seat, a flush rising to his face. Emma felt a surge of sympathy for her brother, caught in this unexpected disruption of his moment. "That is indeed the plan," Thomas confirmed, his voice cooling, "as has been our tradition since Grandfather William's time." Victoria nodded, acknowledging the truth of this statement. "A tradition," she noted, "but not the original intention." Murmurs spread through the gathering. Emma leaned forward, as confused as everyone else. What could her aunt possibly mean? "I have here," Victoria continued, reaching into an elegant leather portfolio beside her chair, "the original letter of instruction from our great-grandfather Jonathan Sheffield, written when he commissioned the chair in 1889. She withdrew a yellowed document, its edges fragile with age. "Most of you have never seen this, as it has been kept in the family vault since my father's time. I retrieved it last month, feeling that this milestone moment deserved a return to first principles." Thomas's expression darkened. "Victoria," This is hardly the appropriate forum for historical debate. We are in the middle of a family tradition. A tradition, Victoria cut in, based on a misinterpretation that has persisted for nearly a century. One that I can no longer allow to continue uncorrected. The tension was palpable now. Even the youngest children sensed something momentous unfolding, their usual restlessness stilled by the electric atmosphere. Jonathan Sheffield, Victoria read from the document, her voice carrying clearly across the silent gathering, created this chair as a symbol of family leadership that was to be entrusted, and I quote directly, not to the eldest by accident of birth, but to the Sheffield who demonstrates the greatest capacity for wisdom and foresight in expanding what we have built. She looked up, her gaze moving deliberately from Thomas to Benjamin, and then, surprisingly, to Emma. Nowhere in this founding document does Jonathan specify that this must be a male heir or the firstborn child. Those assumptions were added later, by those who found them convenient. Emma felt the weight of her aunt's gaze, a strange fluttering sensation spreading through her chest. Around her, relatives exchanged glances of confusion and disbelief. "With all due respect, Victoria," Thomas said, his composed exterior barely containing his evident anger. "This is a tradition that has served our family well for generations. Benjamin has been groomed for this responsibility his entire life. He has the proper education, the connections, the understanding of our family enterprises, as does Emma," Victoria stated simply. The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of reaction spreading outward through the gathering. Emma felt her face grow hot as dozens of eyes turned toward her. Beside her, Claire gasped softly. "Emma?" Thomas repeated, as if the name were unfamiliar to him. "My niece Emma?" "Your niece Emma," Victoria confirmed, who holds an MBA from Harvard and has spent the past 7 years quietly transforming the digital strategy of Sheffield Publishing, resulting in a 40% increase in revenue streams that most of this family hasn't even bothered to notice. Benjamin turned to look at his sister, his expression unreadable. Emma met his gaze, unable to interpret what she saw there. Surprise, certainly, but something else too. Hurt, betrayal, or perhaps just confusion. "This is absurd," Thomas declared, setting down his glass with enough force that the wine sloshed dangerously close to the rim. "The Sheffield chair has always passed to the eldest son. Always." "Not always," Victoria corrected. "Only for the past 96 years. Before that, it passed to my grandmother Eleanor, Jonathan's youngest daughter, who led the family through the Depression with remarkable foresight. A fact conveniently omitted from our family mythology." Thomas stared at his sister. Decades of unchallenged authority suddenly threatened. "You've sat silently through 3 generations of this tradition, Victoria. Why speak now?" Victoria's gaze moved once more to Emma, a gentle determination in her eyes. "Because some traditions deserve to be broken when they no longer serve the truth. And because I made a promise to myself that I would not leave this earth without correcting an injustice that has persisted far too long." A heavy silence blanketed the gathering, broken only by the distant chirp of crickets and the soft tinkling of ice in glasses. Emma sat completely still, feeling as though she had suddenly been thrust onto a stage in a play for which she had never seen the script. Across the lawn, Benjamin's expression had shifted from confusion to something harder, a tightening around his mouth that she recognized from childhood confrontations. "Perhaps," suggested Uncle Robert, Thomas's younger brother and always the family diplomat, "we should continue this discussion privately, after the toast. There are many young children present, and this is meant to be a celebration." "No," said Benjamin suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. All eyes turned to him as he stood, straightening his shoulders with the practiced poise that had always marked him as a future leader. "If there's a question about my fitness to receive the chair, I want it addressed here, in front of everyone." Emma's heart sank. Of course, Benjamin would see this as a challenge to his capabilities rather than a revelation about family history. He had always filtered everything through the lens of personal achievement, a trait that made him an excellent businessman, but sometimes a difficult brother. "This isn't about your fitness, Benjamin," Victoria said gently. "You are extraordinarily capable. This is about correcting a historical error that has limited our family's vision for nearly a century. By suggesting my sister should take my place?" Benjamin's voice held an edge that made Emma wince. "Emma has never expressed any interest in family leadership. She's barely involved in the quarterly meetings, lives 3,000 miles away in Seattle, and has always been content to focus on her small corner of Sheffield Publishing." The dismissive characterization stung, especially because it contained grains of truth. Emma had deliberately maintained a low profile within the family, focusing on her work rather than family politics. Not because she lacked interest, but because the established hierarchy had made it clear there was no real place for her voice. "I think," Emma said, surprising herself by standing, "that I should have some say in this conversation, since it apparently concerns me." Her voice sounded steadier than she felt as dozens of faces turned toward her. Relatives she saw only at these annual gatherings, cousins who had never bothered to ask about her work, uncles who still called her Little Emmy, despite her professional accomplishments. "Of course, dear," Thomas said with the condescending tone he reserved for the women in the family. "Though I'm sure you understand this is primarily a matter for the senior family members to—" "No, it isn't," Emma interrupted. "Another first for this gathering. If Aunt Victoria is correct, then this concerns all of us. Our understanding of our family's values and how we move forward together." She took a deep breath, feeling Claire's encouraging touch on her arm. "I've stayed quiet and distant not from lack of interest, but because this family has made it clear that certain voices matter more than others. I focused on my small corner of Sheffield publishing, because it was the only place I was given any real authority, despite having ideas that could benefit our other enterprises." Benjamin's eyes narrowed. "What ideas? You've never brought anything to the quarterly meetings." "I've submitted 17 detailed proposals over the past 5 years," Emma replied, meeting her brother's gaze directly, "to the executive committee, as per family protocol. All were reviewed and archived, which, as we both know, means filed away without serious consideration." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances with the other members of the executive committee. Emma had done her homework. The proposals had been excellent, many of them predicting digital publishing trends that later proved profitable for their competitors. "That's neither here nor there," Thomas said dismissively. "The fact remains that the Sheffield chair passes to the eldest son. Victoria's historical document, while interesting, doesn't change nearly a century of established practice." "Actually," said a new voice from the edge of the gathering, "it does." Heads turned to see Garrett Sheffield, the family's attorney and Thomas's own son, rising from his seat with a leather folio similar to Victoria's. At 46, Garrett was respected for his legal mind, but had always maintained a careful neutrality in family disputes. "I apologize for the interruption, Father," he said formally, "but as the family's legal counsel, I cannot allow a potential violation of the Sheffield Trust provisions to proceed without comment." Thomas stared at his son in obvious shock. "What are you talking about, Garrett?" "Aunt Victoria shared the original letter with me last month," Garrett explained, his professional demeanor firmly in place despite the personal nature of the situation. "As a matter of due diligence, I had the document authenticated and reviewed its implications for the current trust structure." He opened his folio, removing a document of his own. "The Sheffield chair is not merely symbolic. Its transfer confers specific legal authorities within our family enterprises. The binding trust documents refer specifically to Jonathan Sheffield's original intent, which Aunt Victoria has correctly quoted." Emma felt a strange lightness spreading through her, as if some invisible weight she had carried her entire life was beginning to lift. "Are you suggesting," Thomas asked, his voice dangerously quiet, "that the transfer of the chair to anyone other than Benjamin would be legally valid?" "I'm stating definitively," Garrett replied, "that the transfer must follow the criteria established by Jonathan Sheffield, selection based on demonstrated wisdom and foresight rather than birth order or gender. If we ignore that requirement, we potentially invalidate a century of legal decisions made by the chair's occupant." The implications hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Thomas's authority, and by extension, the legitimacy of decisions made by previous chairs, was suddenly on uncertain ground. "This is preposterous," Thomas declared, though with less conviction than before. "We can't simply rewrite family tradition based on some forgotten letter." "It's not rewriting, Thomas," Victoria corrected. "It's remembering. There's a difference." Benjamin remained standing, his expression now carefully controlled as he assessed the shifting dynamics. Emma had always admired her brother's strategic mind, his ability to recalculate and adjust when circumstances changed. She could almost see him doing that calculation now, weighing options and potential outcomes. "If I may," Benjamin said, his voice measured, "I'd like to understand exactly what's being suggested here. Is Aunt Victoria proposing that Emma should receive the chair instead of me?" Victoria shook her head. "I'm proposing that we return to Jonathan's original intention, that the chair be given to the Sheffield who has demonstrated the greatest wisdom and foresight in expanding what we've built. That requires actual consideration, not automatic assignment based on birth order." "And who would make that determination?" Thomas demanded. You? The letter addresses that as well, Victoria replied, turning back to the yellowed document. The decision shall be made by consensus of the family members who have reached their 30th year, after thoughtful consideration of the contributions and character of potential successors. A murmur spread through the gathering. The Sheffield family currently had 47 members over 30, scattered across the tables. The idea that all of them would have a voice in this decision represented a radical departure from the centralized authority that had characterized family governance for decades. That's completely impractical, Thomas objected. It would be chaos. The family needs clear leadership, not a democracy. Perhaps, said Garrett carefully, there's a middle path. The original intention could be honored while creating a practical process for modern circumstances. All eyes turned to the family attorney, whose legal acumen had guided them through complex business transitions and the occasional scandal with equal skill. Jonathan's letter establishes principles, not rigid procedures, Garrett continued. We could create a selection committee composed of representatives from different branches of the family, who would evaluate candidates based on the criteria he outlined. Emma watched as faces around the gathering registered consideration of this idea. It was elegant in its way, honoring the spirit of the original instruction while providing structure that the sprawling modern family needed. And I suppose you'd put yourself forward as a candidate too, Garrett? Thomas asked his son, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. Garrett shook his head. As family counsel, I would recuse myself from consideration. My role is to ensure the process follows both the letter's intent and current legal requirements. Benjamin cleared his throat. I would like to address the family, he said, his gaze moving around the gathered relatives before settling, surprisingly, on Emma. I've spent my entire life preparing to receive the Sheffield chair, he began. I've made educational and career choices specifically to prepare for that responsibility. I believe I'm qualified to lead this family and its enterprises. He paused, and Emma saw something shift in his expression, a softening she hadn't witnessed in years. But I also believe in meritocracy. If our great-great-grandfather intended the chair to go to the most qualified Sheffield rather than simply the eldest son, then I'm willing to be evaluated on my actual contributions rather than my birth order. Emma felt a rush of unexpected pride in her brother. This graceful pivot, accepting the challenge rather than fighting it, demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership quality their ancestor had described. That said, Benjamin continued with a small smile, I intend to make a very strong case for myself, and I expect any other candidates to do the same. His gaze met Emma's directly now, a hint of their childhood competitiveness sparking between them. It wasn't hostile exactly, but it contained a clear message. If she wanted this, she would have to fight for it. Well then, Victoria said, satisfaction evident in her voice. It seems we have the beginning of a path forward. Thomas, however, remained unmoved. This is still a disruption of tradition that has served us well for generations. I see no compelling reason to change course now. With respect, Father, Garrett interjected, the legal implications alone provide compelling reason. But beyond that, consider the possibility that Jonathan Sheffield's original vision might actually strengthen our family rather than weaken it. How so? Thomas challenged. By ensuring the chair goes to the person best equipped to lead in today's world, not simply the person who happened to be born first, Garrett replied. By considering the full range of talent and perspective our family has to offer. By making leadership something earned rather than inherited. A thoughtful silence fell over the gathering. Even Thomas seemed to be considering these points, his expression softening slightly from outright rejection to cautious contemplation. I propose, Victoria said into this moment of reflection, that we form the selection committee Garrett suggested, with representatives from each branch of the family. They will establish a process for evaluating candidates and make a recommendation before next year's gathering. And in the meantime, Thomas asked, the chair remains empty for a year? Victoria shook her head. In the meantime, the chair remains with you, Thomas. One more year to guide us through this transition. It was a graceful compromise, acknowledging Thomas's authority while creating space for change. Emma saw relief flicker across several faces, particularly among the older generation who valued stability above all else. I could accept such an arrangement, Thomas said finally, his tone suggesting he was conferring a great favor. Provided the committee includes appropriate representation from senior family members. Equal representation from all branches and generations over 30, Victoria countered smoothly. As Jonathan specified. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he nodded once, sharply. Very well. The ceremonial toast resumed shortly after, though with a distinctly different energy than in previous years. As Thomas raised his glass to family unity and prosperity, Emma noticed many eyes flickering between her and Benjamin, speculation evident in their expressions. When the gathering began to disperse after the toast, Benjamin made his way directly to Emma's table, his expression unreadable. "Well," he said, taking the empty seat beside her, "this isn't how I expected the evening to unfold." "No," Emma agreed, studying her brother's face for signs of the anger or resentment she might have expected. "It's not how any of us expected it to unfold." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, turning his empty wine glass between his fingers, a gesture she recognized from childhood, something he did when organizing his thoughts. "Did you know?" he finally asked. "About Victoria's plan to challenge the succession?" "Not at all," Emma replied honestly. "I'm as surprised as you are." He nodded, seeming to accept this. "And are you planning to put yourself forward as a candidate for the chair?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. This was so typical of Benjamin, cutting straight to the heart of a matter while others might still be processing its edges. "I don't know," she admitted. "Until 30 minutes ago, the possibility had never even occurred to me. But now that it has occurred to you?" he pressed. Emma considered the question carefully. The Sheffield chair represented power, certainly, control over significant family resources, influence over business decisions that affected hundreds of employees, the ability to shape the family's legacy for the next generation. She had never sought that kind of authority, had built her career somewhat deliberately away from the family's power center. And yet, "I have ideas, Ben," she said finally. "Ideas about where our businesses could go, how we could adapt to changing markets, how we could use our resources more effectively. Ideas that have been sitting in folders marked, reviewed and archived for years. So that's a yes," he concluded, a flicker of the old competitive spark in his eyes. I'm considering it," she corrected. "There's a difference between having ideas and wanting to lead the entire family." Benjamin leaned back in his chair, studying her with newfound interest. "You know, I always thought you stayed away from family business because you weren't interested, that you preferred your books and your quiet life in Seattle." "I stayed away because there wasn't space for me," Emma said simply. "Every time I tried to contribute, I was patted on the head and told that the men would handle the important decisions." She saw something shift in Benjamin's expression, a dawning recognition. "I never did that to you," he said, though the statement held a question. "Not deliberately," Emma acknowledged, "but you never challenged it either. When Uncle Thomas or Dad would dismiss my suggestions, you never said, 'Actually, Emma might have a point.' You accepted the family hierarchy as it was." Benjamin absorbed this, his brow furrowing slightly. "That's fair," he admitted after a moment. "I never thought about it that way." Across the lawn, they could see Aunt Victoria surrounded by family members, some looking agitated, others curious. The revelation had clearly sparked intense discussion throughout the gathering. "She's remarkable, isn't she?" Benjamin said, following Emma's gaze. 83 years old and still causing productive trouble. "Productive trouble," Emma repeated with a small smile. "I like that. I've always admired her," Benjamin continued, surprising Emma. "Did you know she was the one who encouraged me to pursue my MBA? She said the family needed leaders who understood both tradition and innovation." This was news to Emma. "She encouraged me too, told me that digital publishing was where our future lay, even when Uncle Thomas was dismissing it as a fad. Seems like Victoria has been playing a longer game than any of us realized," Benjamin observed, a new respect in his voice. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the competitive tension between them temporarily suspended by this shared revelation about their aunt's influence on their lives. "If you do decide to put yourself forward," Benjamin said finally, "I won't make it easy for you. I still believe I'm the right person for the chair." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Emma replied, recognizing the statement not as a threat but as an acknowledgement. Her brother was now seeing her as a genuine contender, perhaps for the first time. "But," he continued, surprising her again, "if the selection committee chooses you over me, I'll support their decision. And I'll support you." The simple statement, offered without qualification, touched Emma deeply. For all their differences and the competitive dynamic that had defined much of their relationship, Benjamin was still her brother, still the boy who had taught her to ride a bike and defended her against schoolyard bullies before the complexities of family dynamics and gendered expectations had created distance between them. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means a lot." "Don't thank me yet," he replied with a hint of his usual confidence. "I plan to make an extremely compelling case for myself. Emma laughed, feeling some of the evening's tension finally breaking. I would expect nothing less. As family members began drifting back toward the main house for coffee and dessert, Aunt Victoria approached their table, her expression satisfied but tired after the evening's drama. "Well," she said, settling carefully into a chair across from them. "That was long overdue." "You might have given us some warning, Aunt Vic," Benjamin said, though without real anger. Victoria raised an elegant eyebrow. "And have Thomas shut down the conversation before it could even begin? I may be old, Benjamin, but I'm not tactically naive." "How long have you known?" Emma asked. "About the original letter and Jonathan's intentions?" "Since I was 22, Victoria replied matter-of-factly. "I found the letter in my father's study after he died. By then, the tradition of passing the chair to the eldest son was already firmly established." "Why didn't you speak up then?" Benjamin asked. Victoria's expression softened with remembered pain. "I showed the letter to my brother, your grandfather. He said that changing the tradition would create unnecessary division in the family, that it would be selfish of me to disrupt a system that was working well. And you accepted that?" Emma was surprised. The Victoria she knew had never been one to back down from a fight. "I was young, and he was the head of the family," Victoria said simply. "And perhaps he was right, for that time." The business world in the 1960s was not particularly welcoming to women in leadership. The family might have suffered had I pushed the issue then. She straightened in her chair, her gaze moving between her great-niece and great-nephew. But times have changed. And after watching 7 decades of Sheffield family leadership, I've come to believe that Jonathan's original vision was wiser than what replaced it. The chair should go to the most capable leader, regardless of birth order or gender. "Even if that creates conflict within the family?" Benjamin asked. "Healthy conflict," Victoria corrected. "That forces us to examine our assumptions and consider broader possibilities? Yes, even then. Perhaps especially then." The formation of the selection committee proceeded with surprising efficiency in the days following the reunion. Garrett, leveraging his legal expertise and neutral position, drafted a framework that won approval from both Thomas and Victoria. No small feat given the tension that still simmered between the siblings. Each of the 7 major Sheffield family branches would have 2 representatives on the committee, one over 50 and one under, maintaining the balance Victoria had insisted upon. The committee would establish criteria based on Jonathan's original intentions, invite interested candidates to submit their qualifications, and conduct thorough evaluations before making a recommendation to the full family. Emma returned to Seattle the day after the reunion, her mind still whirling with the implications of Victoria's revelation. Her small but stylish apartment near the water felt different somehow, less like a retreat from family expectations and more like a temporary base camp for whatever might come next. 3 days after her return, a knock at her door revealed Benjamin, immaculately dressed despite the cross-country flight. "I was in the neighborhood," he said with a hint of his usual sardonic humor. Both knew Seattle was 3,000 miles from his New York base. Emma ushered him in, curious about this unprecedented visit. In the 15 years since she'd moved to the West Coast, Benjamin had never once visited her home. "Nice place," he commented, surveying the book-lined walls and the expansive view of Puget Sound. "Smaller than I expected. Not all of us need 3,000 square feet and a doorman," Emma replied, though without real irritation. "Coffee? Please." As she prepared the coffee, Benjamin wandered her apartment, studying the framed photographs and art pieces with genuine interest. Emma watched him surreptitiously, struck by how out of context he seemed in her personal space, like a character who had wandered in from another story altogether. "So," she said when they were settled with their coffee, "what brings you to Seattle, besides checking out your competition's living arrangements?" Benjamin smiled slightly at her directness. "I've been thinking about what you said at the reunion, about having ideas that were filed away without consideration. And I'd like to hear them," he said simply, "before we both get caught up in this selection committee process and start seeing each other purely as rivals." Emma studied her brother's face, looking for signs of strategic calculation. Benjamin had always been a master of chess-like thinking, planning several moves ahead in any situation. But what she saw appeared genuinely open, a curiosity untainted by obvious ulterior motives. "Why now?" she asked. "You've had years to ask about my ideas." "Because I never had reason to question the family's decision-making structure before," he admitted. "The system seemed to be working, at least from my perspective. From the perspective of the person it was designed to benefit," Emma pointed out. Benjamin acknowledged this with a nod. "Fair enough. but I'm here now asking, will you share your vision for Sheffield Enterprises, or would you prefer to save it for the formal selection process? Emma considered the question carefully. There was potential advantage in keeping her ideas close until the official presentations to the committee, but there was also value in opening a genuine dialogue with her brother, in establishing themselves as thoughtful colleagues rather than mere competitors. I'll share some of it, she decided, on one condition. Name it. That you do the same. Share your vision for where you'd take the family businesses if you received the chair. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. That's giving away my strategic advantage. It's establishing a precedent of transparency and collaboration, Emma countered. Regardless of who ultimately receives the chair, we'll be family for the rest of our lives. Wouldn't it be better if we could actually work together effectively? For a moment, Benjamin looked taken aback by this perspective, as if the idea of collaboration rather than competition had never occurred to him in this context. Then slowly, he nodded. Okay, he agreed. You first. Emma rose and retrieved her laptop, opening a presentation she had refined over years of ignored proposals. The digital transformation of Sheffield Publishing was just the beginning, she began, turning the screen so Benjamin could see. What I'm proposing is a comprehensive realignment of all Sheffield enterprises around 3 core principles. For the next 2 hours, the siblings engaged in the most substantive conversation of their adult lives. Emma outlined her vision for modernizing the family's various businesses while honoring their historical strengths. Benjamin asked incisive questions, pointed out potential weaknesses, and occasionally nodded with genuine appreciation for particularly innovative ideas. When Emma finished, Benjamin opened his own laptop and reciprocated, sharing his vision for strategic acquisitions and market expansions that would position Sheffield Enterprises for the next century. You're thinking too conventionally in the media sector, Emma noted during his presentation. The industry is fragmenting faster than your projections account for. Rather than bristling at the criticism, Benjamin considered it thoughtfully. You might be right. My models are based on current disruption rates, not accelerated ones. By the time they ordered dinner from Emma's favorite local Thai restaurant, something had shifted between them. A mutual respect based on genuine engagement with each other's ideas, rather than familial obligation or competitive positioning. You know, Benjamin said as they ate, regardless of what happens with the chair, we should find a way to integrate our approaches. Your digital innovation focus and my market expansion strategy are complementary, not contradictory. I was thinking the same thing, Emma admitted, though the current family leadership structure doesn't really allow for that kind of collaboration. Benjamin was quiet for a moment, considering this limitation. Maybe that's something else that needs to change, he said finally. The suggestion hung between them, radical in its implications, yet suddenly obvious. The Sheffield family's leadership model, like its chair succession, had calcified into rigid hierarchy that perhaps no longer served its purpose in a rapidly changing world. Maybe it does, Emma agreed softly. Over the following weeks, the selection committee took shape and began its work in earnest. To everyone's surprise, 17 Sheffield family members submitted their names for consideration. Not just Benjamin and Emma, but cousins and aunts and uncles who had previously accepted their place in the family hierarchy without question. Victoria's challenge to tradition had apparently unleashed ambitions and ideas that had long been suppressed. Emma threw herself into the preparation process, expanding her initial presentations into a comprehensive vision document. She conducted detailed analyses of each Sheffield business unit, identifying strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities with the same strategic rigor she had applied to the publishing division. When she discovered gaps in her knowledge, particularly around the family's real estate holdings and investment portfolio, she consulted experts and educated herself rapidly. Benjamin, meanwhile, approached the process with characteristic thoroughness. He commissioned a detailed family history that highlighted successful leadership transitions and adaptations to changing markets over the generations. His vision document emphasized continuity while acknowledging the need for strategic evolution in key areas. What neither had anticipated was the reaction from the broader family as the selection process unfolded. After decades of passive acceptance of decisions handed down from above, Sheffield family members were suddenly engaged, asking questions, offering opinions, and in some cases, challenging assumptions that had gone unexamined for generations. It's becoming a genuine meritocracy, Victoria observed during a video call with Emma in late October. Exactly as Jonathan intended. It certainly stirred things up, Emma agreed. She had just finished a 3-hour interview with the selection committee, answering questions that ranged from her specific business strategies to her philosophy on wealth management and family unity. "Change always does," Victoria replied with satisfaction. Thomas is beside himself, of course. He's convinced this entire process will tear the family apart. "Will it?" Emma asked, genuinely concerned. For all its flaws, the Sheffield family had always maintained a cohesiveness that other wealthy families often envied. Victoria considered the question seriously. "I don't believe so. There may be some realignment of relationships and influence, certainly, but the family itself? We've weathered far worse than honest conversation." As the selection process continued, something unexpected began to emerge. A genuine appreciation among committee members and the broader family for the diverse talents within their ranks. Candidates who had initially been viewed as long shots demonstrated expertise and perspective that added richness to the family's collective thinking. Most surprising to Emma was the evolution in her relationship with Benjamin. Their initial conversation in her Seattle apartment had sparked a series of ongoing discussions, each building on the last. They began exchanging articles and industry analyses, pointing out opportunities and challenges relevant to each other's areas of focus. What had started as a tentative truce was developing into a genuine intellectual partnership. "Have you considered," Benjamin asked during one of their regular calls in early November, "that we might both be approaching this all wrong?" "How so?" Emma was intrigued. Her brother rarely questioned his own strategic thinking so directly. "We're both presenting ourselves as individual candidates, with individual visions," he explained. "But what if the most effective leadership for the family going forward isn't a single person at all?" Emma sat back in her chair, considering the radical nature of this suggestion. "You mean some kind of shared leadership model?" "Exactly," Benjamin confirmed. "Not just you and me, necessarily, but a more collaborative approach that leverages different family members' strengths in their areas of expertise." The idea was revolutionary in the context of Sheffield family governance, a complete departure from the centralized authority embodied by the chair for over a century. "Thomas would have a coronary," Emma observed, though she couldn't help but smile at the thought. "Probably," Benjamin agreed with a chuckle. "But Jonathan might approve. His original letter emphasized wisdom and foresight in expanding what the family had built. Maybe the wisest approach for today's complex business environment is distributed leadership rather than a single authority figure." Emma found herself genuinely excited by the concept. It would require completely reimagining our governance structures, the trust documents, the decision-making processes, all of which were designed for a different era, Benjamin pointed out. "The world has changed. Maybe it's time the Sheffield family changed with it." "Are you serious about this?" Emma asked, wanting to be certain this wasn't merely theoretical exploration. "I am," Benjamin replied, his tone resolute. "Serious enough that I think we should develop it as an alternative proposal to the selection committee. Not you or me for the chair, but a new model altogether." The suggestion was both thrilling and terrifying, a complete reimagining of the future they had both been working toward. But as Emma considered it, she recognized its alignment with her own evolving thinking about leadership and collaboration. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's do it. But we'll need more than just the two of us to make it credible." "I was thinking the same thing," Benjamin agreed. "We should reach out to Cousin Michael for the investment portfolio perspective, Aunt Diana for the foundation work, and maybe Rebecca for the international operations." As they began sketching the outline of this collaborative model, Emma felt a growing sense that they were on the cusp of something truly transformative, not just for themselves, but for the entire Sheffield family. Whether the selection committee would embrace such a radical departure from tradition remained to be seen, but the mere act of developing the proposal together represented a kind of victory neither had anticipated when Victoria first interrupted the ceremonial toast 3 months earlier. The Sheffield family's annual holiday gathering at the Boston mansion had always been a more intimate affair than the summer reunion, typically limited to the immediate family branches rather than the extended network of cousins and distant relations. This year, however, the usual festive atmosphere was overlaid with a palpable tension. The selection committee was scheduled to announce its recommendation on Christmas Eve, just 2 days away. Emma arrived early on the 23rd, having flown in from Seattle the previous evening. The mansion was already decorated with its traditional splendor, towering Fraser fir in the main hall adorned with ornaments dating back generations, garlands of pine and holly draped along banisters, and the collection of antique nutcrackers arranged precisely on the library mantelpiece. "Emma, you're early!" Her mother, Elizabeth, greeted her with a warm embrace in the front hall. At 72, Elizabeth Sheffield remained elegant and sharp-minded, though she had always kept herself somewhat removed from the family business operations. "Thought I'd help with any last-minute preparations," Emma offered, though both knew this was unprecedented. In previous years, Emma had typically arrived just before dinner on Christmas Eve, fulfilling her family obligations with dutiful precision before retreating back to her independent life. "How thoughtful," Elizabeth replied, a knowing glint in her eye. Thomas and Victoria are in the library, apparently discussing seating arrangements with unprecedented intensity. Emma smiled at her mother's dry observation. Translation: they're arguing about the announcement ceremony. "Precisely," Elizabeth confirmed. "Your brother is upstairs on a conference call. He arrived last night." The subtle emphasis on Benjamin's earlier arrival wasn't lost on Emma, her mother noting, without direct comment, the unusual eagerness both siblings were showing for this typically obligatory gathering. After settling into her usual guest room, the blue bedroom on the third floor that had been assigned to her since childhood, Emma made her way to the library. She paused outside the heavy oak door, hearing the unmistakable sound of her uncle and great-aunt in vigorous disagreement. "It's completely inappropriate, Victoria. The announcement has always been made by the current chair. Always. And the selection has always been predetermined, Thomas. This year is different in every respect." Emma knocked once and entered, finding Thomas standing by the fireplace, his posture rigid with frustration, while Victoria sat calmly in one of the leather armchairs, a tablet computer balanced on her lap despite her traditional distaste for technology. "Emma," Victoria acknowledged her with a warm smile. "Perfect timing. Perhaps you can help us resolve our little impasse." "There is no impasse," Thomas insisted. "As the current chair, I will announce the committee's recommendation tomorrow evening, as tradition dictates." Victoria's expression remained serene. "And as I was explaining, this selection process has been about examining and updating our traditions where appropriate. Having the committee chair make the announcement would emphasize the collaborative nature of the decision." Emma recognized the delicate power struggle underlying this seemingly procedural disagreement. If Thomas announced the decision, he would symbolically maintain his authority, passing the chair as a gift within his power to bestow. If the committee chair announced it, the message would be clear. The family had collectively reclaimed this decision from the singular authority figure. "Has the committee actually made its decision?" Emma asked, carefully neutral. "Yesterday afternoon," Victoria confirmed. "Garrett, as committee secretary, has informed Thomas and me of the outcome, but it remains confidential until tomorrow's announcement." Emma studied her great-aunt's face for any hint of the decision, but Victoria's expression revealed nothing beyond satisfaction with the process itself. "Perhaps," Emma suggested diplomatically, "the announcement could be shared. Uncle Thomas could open with acknowledgement of the tradition and the chair's historical significance, and then invite the committee chair to deliver the specific recommendation." Thomas considered this compromise, his expression softening slightly. "That could be acceptable, provided I have the opportunity to formally transfer the chair afterward, if Benjamin is indeed the committee's choice." The careful phrasing, "if Benjamin is indeed the committee's choice," caught Emma's attention. Had her uncle received information that suggested otherwise? Or was he simply being cautious in his wording? "A reasonable approach," Victoria agreed, though Emma detected a hint of amusement in her great-aunt's eyes that suggested there was more at play than Thomas realized. The library door opened again, and Benjamin entered, his conference call apparently concluded. He nodded to Emma with a small smile before addressing the group. "Am I interrupting something important?" "Just finalizing the protocol for tomorrow's announcement," Victoria informed him. "Your sister has proposed a sensible compromise that your uncle and I have agreed to." Benjamin raised an eyebrow at Emma, impressed. Diplomatic as always. "Has anyone told you the committee's decision yet?" "No," she replied honestly. "And I wouldn't expect them to break confidentiality." "Very proper," Thomas approved, though his tone suggested he found such propriety somewhat excessive. "Well, if that matter is settled, I have calls to make before dinner." As Thomas exited, Benjamin took the chair opposite Victoria, while Emma moved to the window seat that had been her favorite reading spot as a child. "So," Benjamin said once they were alone, "tomorrow's the big day." "Indeed it is," Victoria agreed, closing her tablet case with a decisive click. "And regardless of the outcome, I want both of you to know how proud I am of how you've approached this process, particularly your collaborative proposal." Emma and Benjamin exchanged glances. They had submitted their alternative governance model to the committee 3 weeks earlier, after expanding their initial concept with input from 5 other family members. The proposal outlined a leadership council structure with specialized authorities rather than a single chair, maintaining the symbolic importance of the Sheffield chair while distributing its practical powers among family members with relevant expertise. "We don't know if the committee took it seriously," Benjamin admitted. "It's a significant departure from what they were tasked with evaluating. More significant than you might realize," Victoria said mysteriously, rising from her chair. "But that's all I'll say on the matter until tomorrow. Now, I believe your mother mentioned something about needing help with the cranberry arrangements for tomorrow's dinner." As Victoria departed, leaving them alone in the library, Emma turned to her brother. "Do you think she knows something we don't?" Benjamin laughed softly. "Victoria always knows something we don't. The question is whether she's planning another dramatic revelation or simply enjoying keeping us in suspense." Christmas Eve morning dawned clear and cold, sunlight glinting off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. The Sheffield mansion stirred to life gradually, family members appearing for the traditional breakfast buffet set up in the conservatory. Emma, who had slept poorly due to a combination of anticipation and the unfamiliar bed, arrived early and found only Garrett already seated, reviewing documents while nursing a cup of coffee. "Morning," she greeted him, helping herself to coffee from the silver service. "Working already?" Garrett looked up with a tired smile. "Just finalizing some details for tonight. The committee has been remarkably thorough in documenting their process and reasoning." Emma took the seat across from him, curious about her cousin's perspective. As committee secretary and family counsel, Garrett had observed the entire selection process while maintaining his characteristic neutrality. "Has it been difficult?" she asked. "Keeping your own opinions separate from your official role?" Garrett considered the question thoughtfully. "At times, the committee discussions surfaced important questions about our family's future. Questions I have my own thoughts about, naturally, but there's value in serving as an impartial facilitator. And you know the outcome," Emma observed. "That must be an interesting position to be in, with everyone trying to read your expressions for clues." He laughed. "Hence my lawyer face. Years of practice concealing reactions have finally found their ultimate purpose in family politics." More family members began filtering into the conservatory. Aunts and uncles, cousins with sleepy children, Benjamin deep in conversation with their mother. The usual holiday small talk filled the air, though Emma noticed an underlying current of expectation in every interaction. The evening's announcement was clearly on everyone's mind, even as they discussed the snow forecast and complimented the gingerbread display. Thomas made his entrance with characteristic timing, appearing just as the gathering reached critical mass. He moved through the room with practiced charm, greeting family members individually while subtly working his way toward the coffee service where Emma and Garrett sat. "Ah, the candidates conferring with legal counsel," he observed with forced joviality as he reached them. "Should I be concerned about breakfast coalition building?" "Just caffeinating, Uncle Thomas," Emma assured him. "The campaigning phase is officially over." "Indeed it is," he agreed, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Garrett, may I have a word before the gift exchange? There's a small matter about tonight's ceremony I'd like to clarify." As the two men moved away, Benjamin took the vacant seat beside Emma. "He's been trying to get information out of Garrett all morning," he reported in a low voice. "Mother says he barely slept last night." "Can you blame him?" Emma replied. "This is the first time in his life he hasn't controlled a major family decision." Benjamin nodded, sipping his coffee thoughtfully. "It's strange, isn't it? A month ago, I was completely focused on making my case for the chair. Now I'm almost more interested in seeing how the family responds to our alternative proposal than whether either of us is selected individually." "I know what you mean," Emma admitted. "Working on that proposal together, bringing in the others, seeing how our different perspectives created something stronger than any one of us could have developed alone. It changed my thinking about what leadership in this family could look like." "Regardless of what happens tonight," Benjamin said with unusual sincerity, "I'm glad we did it. And I'm glad we finally found a way to work together after all these years." Emma was surprised by the sudden emotion that tightened her throat. Their relationship had evolved more in the past 4 months than in the previous decade, moving from distant, competitive siblings to genuine collaborators with mutual respect. "Me too," she said simply. The day proceeded with its traditional rhythms: the morning gift exchange for the children, the afternoon walk through the snow-covered gardens, board games in the library, and quiet conversations in corners of the rambling mansion. Yet beneath these familiar patterns ran a current of anticipation that grew stronger as evening approached. By 7 o'clock, the family had gathered in the formal living room, where the Sheffield chair had been positioned prominently before the fireplace. Unlike the utilitarian office chair it had once been, decades of reverence had transformed it into an almost throne-like symbol, its walnut frame polished to a warm glow, the Sheffield crest lovingly maintained on its high back. Thomas stood beside it, dressed in a tailored suit that emphasized his still imposing figure despite his advancing years. Victoria sat nearby, elegant in deep burgundy, her expression serene. The selection committee members were arranged in a semicircle to one side, while the rest of the family filled the remaining space, some seated, others standing along the walls. Emma and Benjamin, by unspoken agreement, had positioned themselves together near the back of the room, united regardless of the outcome about to be announced. As the grandfather clock in the hall struck the quarter hour, Thomas cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "For 133 years," he began, his voice strong and clear, "the Sheffield family has been guided by the wisdom embodied in this chair. From Jonathan Sheffield's time to our own, it has represented continuity, responsibility, and stewardship of what each generation has built for the next." Emma felt Benjamin shift slightly beside her, his arm brushing against hers in what might have been coincidence or subtle support. "This year," Thomas continued, "we have undertaken a re-examination of how that leadership is determined, returning to Jonathan's original intent that the chair be occupied by the Sheffield, who demonstrates the greatest wisdom and foresight in expanding what we have built." He nodded toward the selection committee. "I now invite Eliza Sheffield, chair of the selection committee, to share their recommendation with the family." Cousin Eliza, at 62, the respected head of the family's educational foundation, rose and moved to stand beside Thomas. She carried a leather folio similar to the one Victoria had produced at the summer reunion, a visual echo that Emma suspected was deliberate. "Thank you, Thomas," Eliza began. "The committee has spent the past 4 months in careful deliberation, reviewing 17 candidates through a rigorous process designed to evaluate their vision, capabilities, and commitment to the family's long-term prosperity." She opened the folio, though Emma noted she did not refer to any notes as she continued. "We began with the assumption that we would be selecting a single individual to receive the Sheffield chair, as has been our tradition. However, through the course of our evaluations, we encountered a compelling alternative that required us to reconsider that fundamental assumption." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Emma felt her heart rate accelerate, while Benjamin went completely still beside her. Two of our candidates, Emma and Benjamin Sheffield, submitted not only their individual qualifications, but also a collaborative proposal for a new governance model, one that would maintain the Sheffield chair as our family's symbolic center while distributing its practical authorities among a leadership council of family members with relevant expertise and demonstrated commitment. Eliza looked up, her gaze moving deliberately around the room before settling on Emma and Benjamin. "After extensive consideration, the committee has concluded that this approach represents the wisdom and foresight Jonathan Sheffield described in his original letter. It honors our traditions while adapting them for a more complex world than our ancestors could have imagined." The room had gone completely silent, everyone processing the implications of this announcement. Thomas's expression was unreadable, though Emma noticed his hand had tightened on the back of the chair. "Therefore," Eliza continued, "the committee recommends that the Sheffield chair be awarded jointly to Emma and Benjamin Sheffield, with the understanding that they will implement the council model outlined in their proposal, including the 5 additional family members they have identified as initial council members." For a moment, no one spoke. Emma felt as though the room had tilted slightly, the familiar surroundings suddenly reconfigured by this unexpected outcome. Beside her, Benjamin exhaled slowly, his expression a mixture of surprise and something like relief. It was Thomas who broke the silence, his voice carefully controlled. "A joint award? The chair has never been shared in its entire history. Nor has it always passed to the eldest son," Victoria pointed out from her seat, though her tone was gentle rather than confrontational. "As we've recently rediscovered." Eliza turned to Thomas with respectful firmness. "The committee considered this recommendation carefully, Thomas. We believe it represents the best path forward for the family, honoring Jonathan's intentions while adapting to current realities." "And the legal implications?" Thomas pressed, looking toward Garrett. "The trust provisions, the voting authorities tied to the chair?" Garrett stepped forward, professional even in this intensely personal moment. "I've reviewed the proposal thoroughly. with minor modifications to certain trust documents, which would require family approval but are entirely feasible. The model is legally sound. In fact, it provides better risk management and succession planning than our current approach. Thomas absorbed this, his expression gradually shifting from resistance to reluctant consideration. Emma recognized the internal calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing tradition against pragmatism, personal preference against family benefit. "And what of the actual chair itself?" he asked finally. "The physical symbol that has represented Sheffield leadership for generations? How can it be jointly awarded?" It was Benjamin who answered, moving forward slightly as he spoke. "The chair would remain exactly where it has always been, in the family library at the estate, Uncle Thomas. Its symbolic importance wouldn't change. But the authorities it represents would be exercised through the council structure rather than by a single individual." Emma joined her brother, adding, "The chair would continue to represent Sheffield family leadership. It would simply recognize that in today's complex world, leadership often works best as a collaborative endeavor rather than a solitary one." She could see various family members nodding thoughtfully around the room. The concept clearly resonated with many of them, particularly those who had submitted their own names for consideration and discovered through that process a desire for greater involvement in family governance. Thomas looked at the chair beside him, the symbol that had defined his identity and authority for decades. For a moment, his expression revealed a glimpse of the man beneath the patriarch, older, perhaps tired of the weight he had carried alone for so long. "And you two," he said, addressing Emma and Benjamin directly. "After years of barely speaking to each other, you're proposing to lead this family together, along with a council of others who may have their own agendas and perspectives? We've discovered over these past months that our different perspectives are actually complementary," Benjamin replied. "Emma sees opportunities I miss. I identify risks she might overlook. Together, we make better decisions than either of us would alone. And we've both recognized that other family members bring expertise and insights that neither of us possesses," Emma added. "The council structure leverages those diverse strengths rather than expecting a single person to be expert in everything." Victoria rose from her seat and moved to stand beside Thomas, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "This is what I hoped might happen when I brought forward Jonathan's letter," she said quietly, though her voice carried in the silent room. "Not to disrupt tradition for disruption's sake, but to help us rediscover the wisdom behind it, and to adapt that wisdom for a new era." Thomas looked at his sister, decades of complicated history passing between them in a single glance. Then, with the deliberate dignity that had characterized his leadership, he turned back to face the family. "The selection committee has made its recommendation," he stated formally. "As the current chair, I have the authority to accept or reject that recommendation." Emma felt Benjamin tense beside her. This was the moment of truth. Would Thomas set aside his own preferences and preconceptions for the family's benefit? Thomas's gaze moved slowly around the room, taking in the faces of siblings, children, nieces, nephews, and cousins who waited for his decision. Then it settled on Emma and Benjamin, standing together before him. "I have often said," he began carefully, "that the Sheffield family's greatest strength is its ability to adapt while maintaining its core values. Perhaps this recommendation represents exactly that kind of adaptation." He turned to the chair, running his hand along its polished arm with a gesture that seemed both possessive and farewell. "I accept the committee's recommendation. The Sheffield chair will pass jointly to Emma and Benjamin, with the understanding that they will implement the council structure as proposed." A collective breath released around the room, followed by a spontaneous burst of applause. Family members rose from their seats, moving forward to congratulate not just Emma and Benjamin, but also the other designated council members scattered throughout the gathering. Thomas stepped back from the chair, making way for his niece and nephew to approach it together. As they did, Emma noticed something remarkable in her uncle's expression. Not just acceptance, but a flicker of genuine relief. After decades of solitary responsibility, perhaps there was freedom in witnessing the birth of a more distributed model of family leadership. "Congratulations," he said formally, extending his hand first to Benjamin, and then, with only the slightest hesitation, to Emma. "May you lead the Sheffield family with wisdom and foresight." The familiar words of the traditional blessing carried new meaning in this unprecedented context, a bridge between what had been and what would now become. The remainder of Christmas Eve unfolded with a peculiar mixture of tradition and transformation. The usual holiday rituals continued: dinner in the formal dining room, carols around the piano, eggnog served in the crystal glasses that had belonged to their great-grandmother. Yet beneath these familiar patterns ran a current of new energy, as family members engaged with each other differently, existing hierarchies subtly reconfiguring in real time. Emma observed these shifts from a strange new vantage point, no longer the overlooked younger sister, but suddenly a central figure in the family's future. The adjustment was jarring, with relatives who had barely acknowledged her at previous gatherings now approaching with questions, suggestions, and congratulations. "It's disorienting, isn't it?" Benjamin commented as they stepped out onto the terrace for a moment of quiet after dinner. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant above the snow-covered garden. "Completely," Emma agreed, grateful for her brother's perceptiveness. "I keep waiting for someone to announce there's been a mistake and we should all go back to our regularly scheduled family dynamics." Benjamin laughed. "I know exactly what you mean, though I suspect some of them are waiting for us to start issuing royal decrees or something equally dramatic." "Is that what Uncle Thomas did?" Emma wondered. "I was always too far from the center to notice how he actually exercised his authority day to day." "More subtle than that," Benjamin replied, leaning against the stone balustrade. "It was in how people deferred to him, sought his approval before proceeding with decisions. The actual power was in the patterns of interaction more than in formal declarations." Emma considered this insight. "So our challenge will be to establish different patterns, ones that encourage initiative and distributed decision-making rather than deference to a central authority." "Exactly," Benjamin agreed. "Though we'll need to balance that with enough clarity and structure that people don't feel adrift. Not everyone thrives with complete autonomy." The easy exchange of ideas between them still felt novel. This ability to build on each other's thinking without the competitive edge that had characterized their relationship for so long. Emma wondered how different their lives might have been if they had discovered this complementary dynamic years earlier. The terrace door opened behind them, spilling warm light onto the snow. Victoria emerged, wrapped in a cashmere shawl against the cold. "There you are," she said, joining them at the balustrade. "Hiding from your new responsibilities already?" "Strategic retreat for planning purposes," Benjamin replied with a smile. "Very different from hiding." Victoria laughed, the sound bright in the winter air. "A diplomatic answer worthy of your new position." She studied them both, her expression softening with genuine affection. "I am so very proud of you both, not just for being selected, but for how you've approached this entire process." "We have you to thank for it," Emma said. "Without your intervention at the reunion, none of this would have happened." "I merely created an opening," Victoria corrected. "You two, and the rest of the family, walked through it with more courage and creativity than I could have anticipated." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, 3 generations of Sheffields contemplating the transformed landscape of their family. "He's coming around, you know," Victoria said finally. "Thomas. He's more relieved than he'll admit to have the burden shared after all these years." "I noticed that too," Benjamin agreed. There was almost a physical change in him after the announcement, like watching someone set down a heavy suitcase they've been carrying too long. "The Sheffield chair has always been as much responsibility as privilege," Victoria observed. "Perhaps more so. Your council model distributes that weight more evenly." Emma considered her great-aunt, 83 years old and still strategically reshaping her family's future. "Did you anticipate this outcome? When you brought forward Jonathan's letter?" Victoria's smile was enigmatic. "I anticipated change. The specific form it would take, that was for the next generation to determine." From inside came the sound of the piano, someone beginning the traditional Christmas carols that would continue until midnight. Victoria turned toward the door. "We should rejoin the others," she said. "Tradition still has its place, even amid transformation." As they followed her inside, Emma caught Benjamin's eye, a moment of silent communication passing between them. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of their new responsibilities. Meetings to schedule, documents to revise, relationships to recalibrate. But tonight was for family in its fullest sense. Not just the structures and authorities they had inherited and would now reshape, but the human connections that gave those structures meaning. The living room was warm with firelight and conversation. Family members gathered in clusters throughout the space. Emma noticed Thomas sitting somewhat apart, watching the scene with an expression that seemed both wistful and contemplative. Making a decision, she crossed to join him, taking the seat beside his. "Quite a different Christmas Eve than we expected," she observed. Thomas studied her for a moment before responding. "Indeed, though perhaps it's fitting that significant changes come at transition points in the year." "I wanted you to know," Emma said carefully, "that Benjamin and I value your experience and wisdom." We'll be looking to you for guidance as we implement this new approach." Thomas raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by this overture. "Even after decades of me overlooking your contributions?" Emma appreciated his directness, the acknowledgement rather than denial of past patterns. "Especially because of that," she replied honestly. "You have perspective on family dynamics that we'll need, including awareness of mistakes to avoid repeating." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a grudging respect kindled by her frankness. "I may have underestimated you all these years, Emma. That was my loss." It was as close to an apology as she was likely to get from this proud man, and Emma accepted it as such. "We all have the opportunity to see each other more clearly now," she said. "That might be the greatest gift from this entire process." Across the room, Benjamin had gathered several cousins around the Sheffield family album, pointing out photographs of earlier generations. Emma noticed he had included Michael and Diana, two of their designated council members, in this impromptu history lesson, already building the collaborative relationships that would define their new leadership approach. As carols filled the room and family members moved between conversations, Emma felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The Sheffield chair would never again represent what it had for past generations, singular authority vested in one individual, but perhaps it would come to symbolize something equally valuable: the family's capacity to honor its history while creating new traditions better suited to changing times. In Jonathan Sheffield's original vision, leadership based on demonstrated wisdom and foresight, she and Benjamin had found not just a historical correction, but a path forward that neither could have crafted alone. 6 months later, the Sheffield family gathered once more at the Berkshire estate, though for a very different occasion than the annual reunion. Today marked the formal implementation of the new governance structure, the Sheffield Leadership Council taking its place as the family's decision-making body after months of careful preparation. The library had been transformed for the ceremony. The Sheffield chair remained in its traditional place before the fireplace, but it was now accompanied by a semicircular table with 7 seats, one for each council member. Behind them, a newly commissioned portrait of Jonathan Sheffield had been hung, his thoughtful expression seeming to approve of the innovation occurring in his name. Family members filled the room, the atmosphere charged with a mixture of celebration and solemnity appropriate to this historic transition. Emma, dressed in a tailored navy suit that projected both authority and approachability, stood with Benjamin near the entrance, greeting arrivals and answering last-minute questions about the ceremony's protocol. "Nervous?" Benjamin asked quietly during a momentary lull. "A little," Emma admitted. "You?" "Appropriately so," he replied with the hint of a smile. "Major transitions deserve a certain amount of healthy anxiety." Victoria approached them, elegant despite the cane she had recently begun using. At 83, she had declined a position on the council despite unanimous family support, insisting that her role was advisor to the revolution, not its ongoing administrator. "Almost time," she noted, consulting the delicate watch at her wrist. "Thomas is ready whenever you are." Emma nodded, taking a deep breath to center herself. The past 6 months had been intensely busy, drafting revised trust documents, developing the council's operating procedures, and meeting individually with family members to address concerns and incorporate suggestions. Throughout it all, her partnership with Benjamin had deepened into a genuine collaboration built on mutual respect and complementary strengths. "Shall we?" Benjamin gestured toward the center of the room, where Thomas stood waiting beside the Sheffield chair. As they moved forward together, the room quieted, attention focusing on this final transfer of authority from the old structure to the new. Thomas had approached the transition with surprising grace over the past months, offering guidance when asked, but carefully avoiding any undermining of the emerging leadership model. "Family," Thomas began, his voice strong despite his 75 years. "We gather today to witness a historic evolution in Sheffield family governance. For over a century, this chair has symbolized the leadership that guides our collective enterprises and preserves our shared legacy." He placed one hand on the chair's high back, the gesture both possessive and relinquishing. Today, that symbolism expands to embrace a new understanding of leadership, one that recognizes the complexity of our modern world and the diverse talents within our family. Thomas turned to face Emma and Benjamin directly. "As my final act as chair, I formally transfer the authorities vested in this position to the Sheffield Leadership Council, to be exercised collectively for the benefit of our family, present and future." From a small table beside him, he lifted a leather-bound document, the newly revised Sheffield Family Trust, and presented it first to Benjamin and then to Emma. "May you lead with wisdom and foresight," he concluded, echoing Jonathan Sheffield's original charge. Benjamin accepted the document with a solemn nod. "We are honored by your trust and example, Uncle Thomas. The foundation you've maintained has given us the stability to build this new approach." Emma, taking her portion of the symbolic handover, added, "And we recognize that today represents not just change, but continuity, a recommitment to the values that have always defined the Sheffield family, expressed in a form better suited to our current reality." Thomas stepped back from the chair, physically ceding the central position he had occupied for so long. There was dignity in his movement, the deliberate grace of a man choosing his legacy rather than having it forced upon him. Emma and Benjamin moved to stand on either side of the Sheffield chair, not sitting in it as past leaders had done, but flanking it as joint custodians of its symbolic weight. At a nod from Benjamin, the 5 other council members rose from their places among the family and joined them, forming a semicircle that physically represented their shared authority. Michael Sheffield, at 47, the family's investment expert, spoke first as planned. "The Sheffield Leadership Council formally accepts the responsibilities entrusted to us. We pledge to honor our family's legacy while guiding its evolution for generations to come." Diana Sheffield, 70 and head of the family's philanthropic foundation, continued, "We will govern through consensus, valuing diverse perspectives and collective wisdom over individual authority." Each council member added their voice to this public commitment, articulating the principles that would guide their leadership: transparency, accountability, innovation balanced with prudence, respect for tradition alongside openness to change. As Rebecca Sheffield, the final council member, completed her portion of the pledge, Victoria rose from her seat at the front of the gathering. In her hands, she held the yellowed letter that had catalyzed this transformation 6 months earlier. Jonathan Sheffield wrote that leadership should be entrusted to those who demonstrate the greatest capacity for wisdom and foresight in expanding what we have built, she reminded the assembly. Today, we honor that vision by recognizing that such wisdom often emerges not from a single mind, but from thoughtful collaboration among diverse perspectives. She approached the semicircle of council members, her gaze moving from face to face before settling on Emma and Benjamin. "The Sheffield chair remains our symbol," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness. "But you have given it new meaning for a new era. Well done." The simple commendation, coming from the woman who had set this entire transformation in motion, carried more weight than elaborate praise from anyone else could have. Emma felt tears prick unexpectedly at her eyes, the emotional significance of the moment finally breaking through her careful composure. As the formal ceremony concluded and family members moved forward to congratulate the new council, Emma found herself beside the Sheffield chair, its solid presence a reminder of the responsibility they had collectively assumed. She ran her fingers lightly over the carved family crest, feeling the connection to generations past and yet to come. "Penny, for your thoughts," Benjamin said, joining her. "I was just thinking about that moment at the reunion," Emma replied, "when Aunt Victoria stood up and changed everything. How differently today might have unfolded if she hadn't had the courage to speak." Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "One person at the right moment can alter the course of an entire family. Or 2 people," Emma amended, glancing at her brother with newfound appreciation. "Working together." Around them, the library hummed with conversation as family members engaged with each other in ways that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Younger cousins discussing investment strategies with senior uncles, aunts and nephews debating digital transformation of traditional business units, generations mixing in fluid conversation rather than the rigid hierarchies that had previously defined their interactions. This, Emma realized, was perhaps the most profound outcome of Victoria's intervention and the governance changes that followed. Not just a redistribution of formal authority, but a fundamental shift in how family members related to each other and engaged with their shared enterprises. The Sheffield chair would always remain the family's symbol, a physical link to their history and values. But leadership had evolved beyond the furniture to which it had been metaphorically attached for so long, becoming something more dynamic, more inclusive, and ultimately more resilient than any single person could embody alone. As Emma moved to join a conversation between council members and other family shareholders, she caught Victoria's eye across the room. The older woman offered a small nod of approval and satisfaction, acknowledgement of a transformation successfully navigated and a family renewed through its willingness to question tradition when necessary, while honoring the wisdom at its core. 1 year after the Sheffield Leadership Council's formal installation, Emma stood at the window of her newly established office in the family's Boston headquarters, watching autumn leaves swirl across the common in the October breeze. Behind her, the council's quarterly meeting had just concluded, a productive session that had finalized the acquisition of a digital media company and approved expanded funding for the family's educational foundation. "Congratulations on pushing the acquisition through," Benjamin said, joining her at the window after the other council members had departed. "Your persistence paid off." "Our persistence," Emma corrected. "Your financial modeling convinced the skeptics far more effectively than my market analysis alone could have done." He acknowledged this with a nod, their complementary contributions now a comfortable rhythm between them. The past year had proven the wisdom of their collaborative approach, with the family's various enterprises showing remarkable growth, despite challenging market conditions. "Hard to believe it's been a year already," Benjamin remarked, loosening his tie slightly as he leaned against the window frame. "Victoria's little revolution has had quite an impact." Emma smiled at the characterization. Little revolution hardly captured the fundamental transformation in Sheffield family governance and relationships. The council model had not only distributed decision-making authority more effectively, but had also unleashed creative energy throughout the family, with previously sidelined members contributing ideas and initiatives that had strengthened their collective enterprises. "Have you seen the results of the family survey?" Emma asked, referring to the anonymous feedback mechanism they had instituted to track satisfaction with the new governance structure. 92% approval, Benjamin confirmed, with particularly high marks for transparency and opportunities for involvement. Even Thomas contributed positive comments, though he couldn't resist suggesting a few refinements to our committee structure. They shared a laugh at this characteristic input from their uncle, who had gradually transitioned from resistance to qualified support for the new approach. Thomas would always prefer more centralized authority than the council model provided, but even he had come to appreciate certain aspects of distributed leadership, particularly the way it had engaged younger family members in sustaining the Sheffield legacy. A gentle knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Victoria entered, moving more slowly now with her cane but still radiating the quiet authority that had made her such a powerful catalyst for change. "I hope I'm not interrupting council business," she said, settling into one of the comfortable chairs near the window. "Just post-meeting reflection," Emma assured her. "The acquisition was approved unanimously." "Excellent," Victoria nodded. Theodore Sheffield would be pleased to see his publishing house evolving into the digital realm. The reference to their 19th century ancestor who had founded the family's original business reminded Emma of how the past and future remained in constant conversation within the Sheffield enterprises. Tradition and innovation not opposed, but intertwined. "I've brought something for you both," Victoria continued, opening the leather portfolio she carried, the same one that had contained Jonathan's letter at the reunion that changed everything. She withdrew 2 small objects and handed one to each of them, intricately carved wooden miniatures of the Sheffield chair, small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. "I had these made from a piece of wood salvaged during the restoration of the original chair last month," she explained. "A reminder that while leadership may evolve in form, its essence remains connected to our shared history." Emma turned the miniature in her hand, feeling the smooth texture of the wood and the precise details of the carving. It was a perfect metaphor for their new governance model, the chair's symbolic importance preserved while its practical function had been reimagined. "Thank you, Aunt Victoria," Benjamin said, genuine emotion in his voice. "For this, and for everything you set in motion last year." "I merely opened a door," Victoria replied with her characteristic modesty. "You, both of you, and the rest of the council, walked through it with more courage and vision than I could have hoped for." Emma placed her miniature carefully on the windowsill, where sunlight caught its polished surface. "The Sheffield chair will always remind us where we came from," she observed, "but it no longer constrains where we might go." "Precisely," Victoria agreed with evident satisfaction. "And that, I believe, is exactly what Jonathan intended all those years ago. Not a rigid adherence to particular forms, but a living commitment to wise stewardship that adapts as circumstances require." Outside the window, the autumn wind continued to scatter leaves across the common, a visual reminder of the natural cycles of release and renewal that governed not just seasons but families and their traditions as well. The Sheffield family had not abandoned its past in embracing a new governance model. It had simply allowed that past to inform rather than dictate its future. As Victoria rose to leave, she paused at the door. Jonathan's letter changed the family's course by challenging assumptions we had held for generations. But the true transformation came from how you responded to that challenge, with openness, creativity, and ultimately, wisdom. After she departed, Emma and Benjamin remained by the window, the miniature chairs a tangible reminder of both inheritance and innovation. "She's right, you know," Benjamin said after a moment. "The letter alone wouldn't have been enough. It required everyone, especially you and me, to imagine something different than what we'd always known." Emma nodded, thinking of how far they had come from that moment when Aunt Victoria had interrupted the ceremonial toast. "The heirloom chair still matters," she reflected, "just not in the way we once thought it did." Outside their window, the ancient trees on Boston Common bent slightly in the strengthening wind, their deep roots allowing them to flex without breaking. Nature's own demonstration of how strength often lies in adaptability rather than rigidity. The Sheffield family had rediscovered this wisdom, finding in their oldest traditions the seeds of renewal rather than constraints to growth. And in doing so, they had ensured that the symbolic chair at the center of their family would remain meaningful for generations yet to come, not as a throne for a single authority, but as a reminder of their collective stewardship of a legacy larger than any individual. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on the traditions and structures in your own family or community. Which ones continue to serve their original purpose, and which might benefit from thoughtful re-examination? Like the Sheffield family, we often inherit patterns and practices whose origins and original intentions have been forgotten or misinterpreted over time. The courage to ask, "Why do we do things this way?" can sometimes reveal opportunities for positive transformation that honors the past while creating space for new growth. Consider whether there are voices in your circle that have been overlooked or undervalued, perspectives that might offer fresh insights if given the chance to be heard. Emma's journey from the periphery to leadership reminds us that valuable contributions can come from unexpected sources when we expand our definition of who belongs at the decision-making table. The shift from individual authority to collaborative leadership that the Sheffields embraced might inspire reflection on how responsibilities are distributed in your own contexts. Are there areas where shared authority might create more resilience and draw on a wider range of talents than centralized control? If you found value in The Heirloom Chair, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore family dynamics, tradition, and the delicate balance between honoring our past and creating our future. Next week, we'll share another narrative about reconciliation and discovering unexpected common ground with those we've long misunderstood. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, may you find wisdom in questioning inherited assumptions and courage in imagining new possibilities.